As late as the 1850s, Fire Island was still considered wild and dangerous, with a past including Native Americans, pirates, whalers, farmers, and hunters. Most of the land was undeveloped because it was tied up in old deeds linking back to William and Mary, King and Queen of England. In 1923, George Weeks and Captain Celia Clock, ancestor to current fire department member Pete Clock, finally secured clear ownership of what is now Fair Harbor. Families began building houses and a community developed. The combination of elevated, wooden, kerosene-heated houses and high winds made the possibility of fires a concern.
Before 1931, we just had volunteers, no organization. Whenever there was a brush fire, we'd have brooms and shovels to put out the brush fires. Most of our fires were brush fires. The few fires that we did have were caused by kerosene stoves. In those days, all the cooking and heating was done by kerosene stoves, and they were dangerous. Several houses burned down that way.
By 1930, the Fair Harbor Fire District was formed, and in 1931, the Fair Harbor Fire Department became a reality. A group of volunteers ready to help each other set the spirit.
In 1931, it was organized by somebody by the name of O'Brien. He was a fireman from New York City. He was a New York City fireman, and he was renting out here, and he volunteered to get several guys together and start the organization. My family started in the fire department right at the beginning. Yeah, my father was one of the first members, along with Jim Larkin and Art Munsell and Mr. Rose, Ernie Grasnick, George Young. Those are several of the ones I can recall right now.
Firefighting equipment was minimal, and well-meaning volunteers did not have the sophisticated training which is available today.
The first fire equipment that we had was what we call soda bottles to put out fires. They were cylinders about 6 foot tall on big wheels, and we just grabbed one of those and went to the fire with the big wheeled carts. When you got to the fire, you would tip the cylinder down, and it would open up a bottle of acid inside of the cylinder, and it would mix with soda ash, with the water that's in there, when it build up its own pressure. And there was about 50 foot of hose on the cart, so we went right up to the front door as much as possible and put out the fire that way.
Pop and I used to go over in the beginning of the year. He did it himself, and then he took it on as a job, so I'd go over and help him, and we put all those fire things that are in those little firehouses, they're baking soda filled, so we used to flush them out in the fall so they didn't freeze, and then in the summertime we'd have to go fill them up, and we went around and filled them all up and got them all working. And for this, he was rewarded by being able to blow the siren on Saturday at 12 o'clock. You know, and he put up the flag, and that was his big thing to do.
Meetings were held in the community center until it was lost in the hurricane of '38.
Mrs. Essler told us that we lost our house, and even my brothers cried. Half the house, which was the top half, was down by Central Walk, and we were right up on the ocean. We were one of 3 houses on the ocean. The whole up floor, second floor, was intact. Even the stairs were underneath the house. And at the time, my next oldest brother, was treasurer of the fire department, and he was worried sick that he had left the money in the upstairs bureau drawer. The whole upstairs was a dormitory, boys' dormitory. And he went right to we got in the house, and he went right to the bureau drawer, and there was the money. Soaking wet, but there was the money, and he was so relieved.
Fewer than 10 houses survived the hurricane. Many people sold out, and needs changed. 12 years later, in 1950, the original firehouse was built.
My dad, being a mason contractor, offered his services, and he offered the services of his #1 man, and they accepted, of course, and he was the one that was in charge of almost of building the firehouse in 1950.
The new firehouse was quite an adventure right there, and everybody donated their time, and it was all done for free, just about. I think the cement was the only thing that wasn't for free, but as far as any of the construction, everybody who lived on the beach donated their time to put it up. It was our firehouse, and that was it.
The Fair Harbor Firehouse grew to be a center for community activity as the fire department hosted dances, parties, and the Labor Day Parade. As more houses were built and Fair Harbor continued to grow, fire protection had to improve to meet the needs of the community.
In the old firehouse, there was a fire company, mostly comprising men, to be sure all men at that time, from villages just on the other side of the bay, mostly Long Islanders, Suffolk County, Islip people for the most part. There was certainly no New York City people in the fire department at that time. One day in the early 50s, I can't remember what year exactly, a pal of mine out here named Chuck Colahan, Charles Colahan, he was crazed with love for Fire Island and Fair Harbor, I guess as I was and am. And he asked me if I'd like to join the fire department. I could hardly say that I had given the matter the least thought until that very moment. But when asked would I like to, I said, sure, that sounds like a great idea. And Chuck told me that he had applied for membership in the Fair Harbor Fire Department and had been turned down. So I, being a lawyer, he said, what can we do about it? I said, the first thing you do about it is go out to Riverhead, which is the county seat, and check and see what the certificate of incorporation of the fire department shows. And he came back a couple of days later, full of excitement. He said, the certificate of incorporation permits 2 companies, and what we have here is 1 company. It was then called the Police and Salvage Company. He said, but we're allowed under the certificate to have 2 companies. He said, what do we have to do to have another company? And after I did some research, I came back and told him, all you got to do to form a company is form a company. And he was the first chief of the hose company and had badge #1. If you look closely, you can see who has badge #2. So I was, although not the second man in the fire department, I was the second person to join the hose company. And then, in a matter of just a few years, lots of people, the village was growing by leaps and bounds, houses being built, more New Yorkers coming out, and those who joined almost automatically joined the hose company. And before too long, the hose company had twice the number of members that the Police and Salvage Company did. And obviously then, since both companies voted for chief, the chief then year after year came out of the hose company. And finally, after 6 or 7 or 8 years, the Police and Salvage Company approached the hose company. Their membership was dwindling, ours was growing, and they asked if it would be okay if we just merged the 2 companies and do away with the necessity of double sets of officers and two separate meetings and so on. And that became the hose company.
It was really different than it is today. Back then we had a corn broom and a reel that we would pull by hand to get to a hydrant, and the broom was to hit the fire on the sand and raise the sand to smother the fire that might have been happening. Today, things are much different. We have equipment, we have hoses that'll reach different parts of the island, and it's much better.
When I first started, we had a Ford tractor, a Model B pumper. We had a few side cutters that people used to borrow to cut around their homes to keep the brush away. We had brooms, and we had Indian tanks, and everybody had to have hoses on their houses to protect their houses.
One of the original vehicles is here, that ratty old Ford. I don't know how old it is. It must be from the 30s. That was one of our original vehicles. That was quite typical. There were 2 or 3 like that. And then the money was raised basically from the community, because we had no taxing authority. The money was raised by voluntary contributions, and we started to buy something resembling professional equipment.
Changes that I've seen is that the equipment is much more efficient. We have firehouses to store our equipment now, and places for entertainment, and we have a lot of interested people in the fire department.
Slowly over the years, we've come to the point where we now have real firemen, fully equipped with helmets, boots, all kinds. That's of course just the outer trappings, but all of the equipment is first rate. A professional company in a village of this sort would have nothing more than we have, except there'd be a paycheck at the end of each week. But this village is now very well protected by a very well trained and well equipped fire department, of which everyone in the village has a reason to be proud.
The equipment we have today for the Fair Harbor Fire Department is really great. Over the years, there was many fights to get this extra equipment. I can remember when we were talking about Scott packs, and everybody says, well, we don't need Scott packs. We're only at the beach. But now that's a piece of equipment that we use every day. We had, we had a 1962 pumper. That was one of the first new trucks that came to Fair Harbor. And now it's our oldest truck. And then we got the GMC. And I think, over the years, the taxpayer has done a very fine job in replenishing our equipment, especially our turnout gear. I used to go around to the fire departments and beg and borrow, not steal, our gear so we could have some protection. And over the years now we supply all our active firemen with fire department gear.
Since most of the weekday residents of Fair Harbor were women, the fire department took a progressive step and began encouraging women volunteers.
Training years ago was quite a bit different than it is now. One story I have to think about was one of our instructors, Don Manning, came over here from the mainland, had never been to Fire Island before, and years later he told me he couldn't get over the fact that we were discussing whether we should wear shoes or not during drills and for the parade, so that goes back quite a while. Now, my job in the fire department, I'm a radio dispatcher. It entails being here and keeping track of exactly everything that's going on, who's driving what truck, what's happening at the scene of the fire. Sometimes it might be necessary to call in another fire department for assistance, and to just be there for anybody who calls in for help or extra aid. I like to empty the hoses. I used to like the water thief, lying on the sidewalk, directing the water to either this hose or that hose. So I was actively involved. There was an article in the New York Times showing the women in the Fair Harbor Fire Department. The most rewarding experience, just a general feeling of being there to help if need be.
We were the first fire company in the country to have a female chief. We were certainly the first fire company to have an Asian woman as the chief. And it's a wonderful, wonderful bunch with whom I'm very proud to have been associated all these years.
Over the years, the Fair Harbor Fire Department has kept pace with improvements in training. Now monthly drills include continuous courses in firematics, CPR, and hazardous materials. The training has paid off in the way fires are handled.
91, 93, 96, 97, 98, and 99. Fair Harbor took the trophy.
Want it overflowing.
Are you ready? Yes. On your mark. Set. Go.
Gotta get up here.
The Fair Harbor Fire Department has won the annual firefighters competition for 10 years thanks to the training of its volunteers. The Fair Harbor Fire Department has expanded its area of responsibility to now include Dunewood and Lonelyville.
Things have changed dramatically in the fire department as far as the membership, as far as the equipment that is available to us to fight. We have taken 2 other protection districts on since 1981, Dunewood and Lonelyville, and things have grown. I mean, we've come a long way from pulling the horses around to, big trucks with big hoses. I'm honored to be the chief of the Fair Harbor Fire Department, and I don't know if my wife is too happy about it, being that I'm on my 5th term right now. I enjoy it.
Best chief that I know is Scott, because he's worked with the hardest situation and managed to get along with it. He's a good diplomat and he's a knowledgeable firefighter.
The morale of the fire department, I basically attribute to me being chief. I mean, I feel the morale is up. The guys like to come down here to the drills. They like to come to the meetings. And it makes me feel good.
By being in the fire department, you get the spirit de corps, comradeship, and you really meet a lot of interesting people. I guess I'm one of the oldest fire department members, yeah.
I'd like to see more members. I'd like to see a lot of interest from the community. We've been averaging 5 new members a year for the last 5 years. I wouldn't mind seeing any more. There's a lot of departments here on the island that do have a cap on their membership, which I don't agree with. I would like to see more members. Department interest with the community. I mean, we've been working with the community side by side, and I feel that the community's got a lot of interest in what goes on in the department, and vice versa. I am very concerned about what goes on in the community.
The Fair Harbor Fire Department is proud of its newest addition, a super pumper truck, which will enable the department to draft water from the bay or ocean to ensure that the department will always be able to meet any fire demands.
We're standing in front of a brand new truck, which we just got, and it really is a beauty. It'll do a good job in drafting water. We've been talking about it for the last 3-4 years. And finally we decided we need it because the hydrants don't have adequate water. There's water in it, but it's not enough of a volume to really put out a serious fire. Drafting water is where a hose is dropped off at the end of the bay, at the end of the dock, right into the bay, and that water is then pumped to the scene, wherever it may be. It's got long enough hoses that'll reach.
I do believe we are qualified to fight a major fire. We are well trained, and I got a lot of faith in my men.
Fortunately, there hasn't been a fire of major proportions in Fair Harbor in many years, but the department has been called out a number of times in recent years to give mutual aid in potentially dangerous fire situations to neighboring communities. Such was the case in January 1999, when the Fair Harbor Fire Department went to the aid of Salt Air in response to a major structural fire involving 2 houses. It was a very windy day, and live cinders were flying all around, yet the damage was minimized. Given the time of year, there were few firefighters available, and the Fair Harbor Fire Department played a critical role in helping the Salt Air Department contain the fire. Today, after 70 years of improvement in equipment and training, your fire department is one of the strongest on Fire Island. Its tradition and commitment to the community remains as strong today as it was 70 years ago. Congratulations to the Fair Harbor Fire Department's 70 years of service to